What does it feel like when the man you gave 10 years of your life to looks at you like you're nothing? For Alara Vance, it felt like ice flooding her veins. In the sterile chill of a lawyer's office, her ex-husband Mark didn't just sign the papers that ended their marriage. He incinerated her past. He stood there, his arm wrapped around his new fiancée, a woman dripping in jewels, and laughed. He laughed at the single tear that escaped Alara's eye. "Tears, Alara," he sneered, his voice a weapon. "Save them. No one's buying that pathetic act anymore." She was broken, alone, and publicly humiliated. Little did he know her tears were about to be valued far higher than he could ever imagine. The signature felt less like an act of finality and more like a betrayal of the hand that wrote it. Alara's fingers, trembling slightly, pressed the pen to the last page of the divorce settlement. The ink, a stark, unforgiving black, sealed the end of a decade. Her decade. 10 years of building a home, supporting a man's dreams, and weaving her own hopes into the fabric of a shared future. Now that fabric was a pile of ash at her feet. They were in the conference room of Mark's lawyer, a place that reeked of expensive leather and smug victories. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, a glittering expanse that suddenly felt alien and hostile. Across the polished mahogany table, Mark Sterling didn't even look at her. He was too busy admiring the diamond bracelet on his fiancée's wrist, his thumb tracing the glittering stones, as if they were the only things in the world that mattered. The fiancée was Isabella Croft, daughter of construction magnate Alistair Croft. She was everything Alara wasn't, or rather everything Mark had decided Alara wasn't anymore. Isabella was sharp angles and cold beauty, her smile a carefully curated expression that never quite reached her eyes. She wore a Chanel suit the color of cream, a stark contrast to Alara's simple off-the-rack gray dress that suddenly felt like a pauper's rags. "All signed?" Mark asked, his voice impatient. He finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over Alara with a dismissive air that was more painful than any shouted insult. This was the man who had once whispered that her eyes held all the stars in the universe. Now he looked at her as if she were a piece of furniture he was eager to dispose of. Alara's lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed public defender named Mrs. Gable, gave a curt nod. "Everything is in order." The settlement was a joke. Mark's lawyers, a pack of corporate sharks from Sterling and Finch, had argued that Alara had contributed nothing of monetary value to the marriage. She hadn't worked, they'd said. She had been a homemaker. The business Mark had built, a successful marketing firm, was in his name alone. The house which Alara had spent years turning into a home was being sold. She was walking away with a pittance, a sum so insulting it was clearly meant to be a final slap in the face. A single hot tear escaped her control, tracing a burning path down her cheek. She quickly tried to wipe it away, but it was too late. Mark saw it. A cruel smirk played on his lips. He leaned forward, his voice low enough that only she and Isabella could hear the venom in it. "Tears, Alara. Really? What are you crying for?" "The end of your free ride." Isabella let out a delicate, tittering laugh. "Don't be so harsh, darling," she said, though her eyes were daggers. "She's probably just realizing she'll have to get a real job now." The word struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. Her free ride. She remembered the all-nighters she'd pulled helping Mark draft business plans on their tiny kitchen table. The endless networking events she'd attended, smiling until her face ached, charming potential clients. The sacrifices, the skipped vacations, the unwavering belief she'd poured into him. All of it erased, reduced to nothing. "Save them," Mark continued, leaning back in his chair and draping an arm around Isabella. "No one's buying that pathetic act anymore. You're not the supportive wife of a rising star now. You're just an ex-wife. Yesterday's news." The humiliation was a physical entity, a lead weight pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to breathe. She felt the eyes of the lawyers on her, a mixture of pity and professional detachment. She had to get out. Without a word, Alara stood up. Her legs felt unsteady like a newborn foal's. She grabbed her worn handbag from the floor, its cracked leather a testament to a life of practicality, not luxury. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," she murmured, her voice a hoarse whisper. She turned and walked towards the heavy glass door, each step an monumental effort. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see their triumphant smiles one more time. As the door swished shut behind her, she heard Mark's voice loud and clear, carrying into the hallway. "Finally! Now, Isabella darling, what do you say we celebrate at the St. Regis? I believe a bottle of their '98 Cristal is in order." The sound of their laughter followed her down the silent carpeted hall, chasing her out of the building and into the harsh light of the afternoon sun. Elara stood on the bustling sidewalk, blinking as the city rushed past her in a blur of yellow cabs and hurried footsteps. She was invisible, a ghost in a gray dress haunted by the life she had lost. The single tear she'd shed in that room was followed by a silent, shuddering wave of grief. She cried not for the man he was, but for the man she thought he had been, and for the woman she had been when she was with him. That woman was gone now, and Elara had no idea who was supposed to take her place. The first week of her new life was a study in silence. The grand 5-bedroom house she had shared with Mark was replaced by a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in a part of the city she'd only ever driven through with the doors locked. The silence there was different. In the old house, silence had been peaceful, a comfortable quiet shared between two people. Here it was a hollow, ringing void that amplified the sound of her own breathing and the frantic beating of her heart. The walls were thin, painted a sickly shade of beige. She could hear the neighbors' arguments, the blare of their television, the cry of a baby. It was a constant reminder of the lives happening all around her, while hers had ground to a screeching halt. The pittance from the settlement barely covered the deposit and 3 months' rent. After that, she was on her own. For days she did nothing but unpack the few boxes of belongings Mark had allowed her to take. Old photographs felt like relics from another person's life. The woman in them, smiling brightly next to a younger, more hopeful-looking Mark, was a stranger. Elara saw the naivety in her own eyes and felt a bitter pang of regret. Had she been blind? Or had she simply chosen not to see the subtle shifts in his character? The growing arrogance, the casual cruelty that had started as jokes at her expense. Her reflection in the dusty bathroom mirror was a stranger, too. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy and shadowed. The spark that had once defined her was gone, extinguished by a flood of betrayal. Mark's final words echoed in her mind. "You'll have to get a real job now." He'd said it as an insult, but it was now her reality. Her resume was a ghost. 10 years as a homemaker. Before that, a bachelor's degree in art history, a passion she had set aside to support Mark's ambition. Who would hire a 32-year-old woman with a decade-long gap in her employment history and a degree most considered useless? The rejection emails piled up. Overqualified. Underqualified. Not the right fit. Each one was a small, sharp jab at her already fractured self-esteem. The savings dwindled with alarming speed. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. She sold the few pieces of jewelry Mark had given her in their early, happier years. The pearl necklace he'd bought her for their first anniversary fetched enough for a month's worth of groceries. The irony was not lost on her. One rainy Tuesday, staring at her last $50, Elara knew she couldn't be picky anymore. She scrolled past the listings for office assistants and junior marketing roles and landed in the service industry section. There a posting caught her eye. Housekeeping staff full-time, the Apex Tower, competitive hourly wage benefits included. The Apex Tower. It was the most exclusive residential building in the city, a glittering spire of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Its residents were a who's who of the city's elite old money tech billionaires, foreign dignitaries. Working there as a cleaner felt like the ultimate humiliation, a cosmic joke. She would be cleaning the toilets of people like Isabella Croft. Swallowing her pride, which tasted like ash and bile, she filled out the online application. To her surprise, she got a call the next day. The interview was with a stern but fair woman named Maria, the head of housekeeping. Maria didn't care about the gap in Elara's resume or her degree in art history. She cared about attention to detail, reliability, and discretion. The people who live here. Maria said, her eyes boring into Alara's. They don't want to see you or hear you. You are a ghost. You do your job perfectly and you disappear. You see nothing, you hear nothing, you say nothing. Can you do that? Yes, Alara said, her voice stronger than she expected. I can do that. She was hired. Her uniform was a simple but well-tailored black polo shirt and black trousers. Her first day was a blur of training, learning which cleaning products to use on Italian marble versus Brazilian slate, how to fold towels into perfect hotel-style triangles, and the cardinal rule: never ever engage a resident unless they engage you first. The work was grueling and anonymous. She cleaned sprawling, empty apartments that were more like art galleries than homes their owners off in Paris or Tokyo. She scrubbed floors so polished you could see your own defeated reflection in them. It was mindless, repetitive work, which was both a blessing and a curse. It gave her too much time to think. As she polished a chrome faucet to a mirror shine, she would remember polishing the silver for a dinner party Mark was hosting for potential investors. The memory so sharp it felt like a phantom pain. The other staff were polite but distant, each lost in their own world of silent work. Alara ate her lunch alone in the stark, windowless staff cafeteria in the building's sub-basement. She was a ghost, just as Maria had instructed, and in a way it suited her. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted to disappear. The apex tower, with its hushed corridors and empty, silent homes, was the perfect place for a woman who felt like she no longer existed. Little did she know, in the highest, most exclusive corner of the tower, someone was about to see her for the very first time. The penthouse at the apex tower was a legend among the staff. It was referred to simply as the Summit. It occupied the entire top 2 floors, a glass palace in the sky with its own private elevator, and a view that could humble a god. It belonged to the man who had built the tower itself, Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne was more myth than man. The staff whispered stories about him, that he was impossibly demanding, that he fired people for looking at him the wrong way, that he was a recluse who hadn't been seen in public for years. No one from housekeeping was ever assigned to the Summit. He had his own private staff flown in from Europe, who were as mysterious as he was. So when Maria called Alara into her office one Friday afternoon, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was sure she was being fired. Maybe she'd left a smudge on a window or a towel folded incorrectly. "Alara?" Maria began, her face unreadable. "There's been a change in staffing. Mr. Thorne's personal housekeeper had a family emergency and had to fly back to Switzerland. He has requested a temporary replacement from our team." Alara's eyes widened. "Me? He doesn't want a stranger in his home," Maria explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "He requested someone who is already on staff, someone who understands the protocols of this building. Your work has been flawless. You are quiet, efficient, and invisible. You are the perfect candidate." Maria's tone made it sound less like a compliment and more like a diagnosis. "The pay is triple your current rate, but the rules are tenfold. You do not speak to him. You do not look at him. You clean only the areas designated on this floor plan. His private study and bedroom are off limits unless you are expressly told otherwise. Do you understand?" Alara nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "I understand." The private elevator to the Summit was operated by a key card Maria gave her. It ascended in unnerving silence, the display showing no numbers, only a climbing arrow. When the doors opened, they opened directly into a space that stole her breath. It wasn't a home. It was a cathedral of modern art. The ceilings were 30 feet high. One entire wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the city. The furniture was minimal, but exquisite. A black leather sofa by Le Corbusier, a Noguchi coffee table, a single, starkly beautiful Ansel Adams photograph on a vast white wall. The air was cool and still scented faintly with something clean and masculine like sandalwood and rain. It was also utterly sterile. There were no family photos, no clutter, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was as beautiful and as empty as a museum after hours. Following the floor plan, Ilara began to work. She cleaned with a precision she didn't know she possessed, terrified of making a single mistake. She dusted shelves holding first-edition books that were worth more than her entire life savings. She polished a grand piano that looked as though it had never been played. She worked there for 3 days and never saw him. She would arrive in the morning to an empty apartment and leave in the evening before he returned. She only knew he was there by the subtle signs: a coffee cup in the sink, a newspaper left on the counter, the faint indentation on the sofa cushions. He was a ghost in his own home, and she was his ghost cleaner. On the 4th day, she was cleaning the immense glass wall that overlooked the city. It was a painstaking process, involving a specialized squeegee and a focus so intense she lost all track of time. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. It was breathtaking. For the first time in months, Ilara felt a flicker of something other than grief or anxiety. She felt a moment of peace. "It's called the golden hour." The voice, a deep, quiet baritone, came from directly behind her. Ilara gasped and spun around so fast she dropped her cleaning cloth. Leaning against the doorframe of a room she hadn't realized was there stood Julian Thorne. He was nothing like the monster the staff's whispers had created. He was tall and lean, dressed in a simple dark gray sweater and black trousers. His hair was dark, his features sharp and defined, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of storm clouds, intelligent and piercing, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. They were also filled with a profound, soul-deep weariness. I'm so sorry, sir." Ilara stammered, her face flushing with heat as she bent to retrieve the cloth. "I didn't hear you. I was just looking at the view," he finished for her, his voice calm. He didn't seem angry. He seemed observant. He walked slowly into the room, his movements graceful and deliberate. "Most people who work for me are too afraid to look up." He stopped a few feet away from her, his gaze shifting from her face to the sunset. "My father was a photographer. He always said this was the only time of day the world tells the truth. The light is too soft to hide the flaws and too beautiful to care about them." Ilara was speechless. This man, this myth, was talking to her. About art. About his father. She remembered Maria's warning: "You do not speak to him. You do not look at him." She had already broken both rules. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. "I will get back to my work, sir. I apologize for the interruption." She expected him to dismiss her, to walk away. Instead he said, "What is your name?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Ilara, sir. Ilara Vance." "Ilara." He repeated the name, sounding strange and new in his voice. He was silent for a long moment, simply watching the last embers of the sun die out behind the skyline. "You have a smudge on the upper pane. There." He didn't point. He simply looked at a spot high above their heads. Ilara followed his gaze and saw it, a tiny, barely perceptible streak she had missed. Humiliation washed over her. Of course, he was testing her. The moment of connection was an illusion. He was just a demanding employer, and she was just the help. "I'll take care of it immediately, sir," she said, her voice turning cold and professional. She turned her back on him and retrieved her tools, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't see the look on his face as she did so. A flicker of something that wasn't anger or disappointment, but something closer to curiosity. The ghost in the penthouse had finally seen her, and in his cold, empty world even the smallest, most unexpected presence could cause a ripple. The encounter left Ilara deeply unsettled. Julian Thorne was no longer a myth. He was a man of unnerving perception and quiet melancholy. For the rest of the week, she worked with a heightened sense of awareness, constantly feeling as if his storm-gray eyes were watching her even when he wasn't there. The silence of the penthouse now felt charged, expectant. She began to notice things she hadn't before. Not just the expensive art and first edition books, but the subtle clues about the man who lived there. On his vast empty kitchen island amongst the architectural magazines and financial reports was a well-worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, its pages filled with handwritten notes in the margins. In a corner of the living room, almost hidden behind a speaker, was a framed photograph turned away from view. Her curiosity gnawed at her, but she remembered Maria's warnings and her own precarious position. She was a ghost. She was invisible. She forced herself to focus on her work on making every surface gleam, every line perfect. One afternoon she was tasked with cleaning the formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a long obsidian table that could seat 20. The room was clearly never used. As she was carefully dusting the table's surface, she noticed a portfolio case left behind slightly open. It wasn't his usual leather briefcase. This one was older, made of canvas, and a few papers had slipped out. Her training screamed at her to ignore it, to clean around it and pretend it didn't exist. But one of the pages that had slid out was a blueprint, and something about it caught her art history-trained eye. It was for a building, but it was unlike the cold corporate monoliths Julian's company Ethelridge Holdings was famous for. This design was different. It was elegant, fluid, and designed to integrate with nature. It was for a children's hospital. Beneath the blueprint was a project proposal. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph before she could stop them. The project was named the CT, Memorial Children's Wing. It spoke of creating a space for healing that didn't feel like a hospital, a place of light and hope for the city's sickest children. It was a philanthropic endeavor funded entirely by a private trust, Julian Thorne's trust. The portfolio was full of them plans for public parks, art scholarships, homeless shelters. This was a side of the ruthless billionaire the world knew nothing about. This was the man behind the myth. Suddenly, a sound from the main living area made her jump. The private elevator had arrived. Julian was home early. Panic seized her. She quickly tried to slide the papers back into the portfolio, but her fumbling fingers betrayed her. In her haste, she knocked over a heavy silver pen that had been lying next to the case. It rolled off the table and clattered onto the polished concrete floor with a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silent room. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried. Julian Thorne appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his jacket slung over one shoulder. He looked tired. His eyes went from her terrified face to the portfolio on the table, to the pen on the floor. Ilara braced for the inevitable. For the cold dismissal, the call to Maria, the end of the only job she had. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry. I was cleaning, and I knocked this. I didn't mean to look." Her voice was a desperate, trembling whisper. He said nothing for a long moment. He walked over, picked up the pen, and placed it calmly back on the table. He then looked at the blueprints she had been staring at. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "This wing," he said, his voice quiet but laced with an edge of steel. "It is named after my sister, Chloe Thorne. She passed away when she was 7. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Ilara felt the professional barrier between them dissolve, replaced by a moment of profound and painful human connection. She saw him not as her boss, the billionaire titan, but as a man carrying an immense hidden grief. Her own loss was so fresh, so raw, that she recognized the shape of his. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, she spoke from the heart. "My father was an architect," she said softly. "He always said that a building wasn't just stone and glass. He said it was a home for a memory, a place to keep something precious safe." She looked from the blueprints to his face. "It's a beautiful home for her memory." The stony mask on Julian's face flickered. For a split second she saw something in his eyes. Surprise, vulnerability, perhaps even gratitude. He had expected an apology, an excuse. He had not expected to be understood. He slowly closed the portfolio, his movements deliberate. "What did you say your degree was in, Mrs. Vance?" "Art history, sir," she replied, confused by the question. "I see," he said. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and for the first time his gaze wasn't weary or piercing, it was contemplative. The project manager for this is an idiot. He doesn't understand the aesthetic principles. He thinks functional and beautiful are mutually exclusive. He tapped a finger on the closed portfolio. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I want you to look at the rest of the plans. Alara stared at him dumbfounded. Sir, I'm a housekeeper. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. For today, perhaps. Tomorrow you're a consultant. He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. And Alara, he said without looking back. Thank you. The word, so simple, so unexpected, left her reeling. As the sound of his footsteps faded away, Alara stood alone in the vast, silent dining room, the blueprints for a dead child's memorial in front of her. She had come to the apex tower to be a ghost, to be invisible. But somehow in the penthouse of the most reclusive man in the city she had been seen, and her life was about to change forever. The next morning Alara arrived at the summit not in her housekeeping uniform, but in the only business-appropriate outfit she owned, the same simple gray dress she had worn to finalize her divorce. It felt different today, less like a symbol of her defeat and more like armor. Julian Thorne was already in his study, a room she had never been allowed to enter. It was a surprising space, not cold and sterile like the rest of the penthouse, but warm and lived in. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with books on philosophy, history, and architecture. Instead of a desk, there was a massive wooden drafting table covered in sketches and blueprints. He was standing over it, a mug of black coffee in his hand. He gestured for her to join him. The problem, he said without preamble, is here, the entrance hall. I want it to feel like walking into a forest of light. My project manager gave me this. He pointed to a sterile box-like design. It looks like a morgue. For the next 2 hours they weren't employer and employee. They were two minds focused on a single problem. Alara, hesitant at first, slowly found her voice. Her art history degree, so long dormant, came to life. She talked about the use of light in Gothic cathedrals, the principles of organic architecture championed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the way Japanese design incorporates nature. Julian listened intently, challenging her ideas, pushing her to elaborate. He was sharp, demanding, and brilliant. She found herself energized, her mind firing on all cylinders for the first time in years. They sketched ideas on tracing paper, their hands occasionally brushing, sending a jolt of unexpected electricity through her. By 9 a.m., they had a new concept. A soaring atrium with structural pillars, like ancient trees, and a ceiling of dappled glass that would filter the light like a forest canopy. It was beautiful. It was perfect. Julian leaned back, looking at their combined work with a rare expression of satisfaction. I haven't had an intellectual conversation that stimulating since, well, ever. He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes clear. The job is yours if you want it. Project consultant for the memorial wing. Your salary will be commensurate with the role, not with your previous one. Alara felt a dizzying rush of hope. It was more than a job. It was a lifeline. It was a chance to be herself again. Yes, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Yes, I want it. The news of Alara's sudden promotion sent ripples through the staff, but no one was more shocked than Maria, who simply nodded and handed Alara a new keycard with a cryptic look in her eye. Alara's life transformed overnight. She moved from the sub-basement cafeteria to a sleek office at Ethelredge Holdings headquarters. She traded her cleaning uniform for business suits she bought on a new company credit card. The work was challenging and all-consuming. She was not just a consultant. Julian made her an integral part of the team. He valued her opinion not just on aesthetics, but on the entire project's ethos. For the first time in a decade, she felt respected. She felt powerful. The fragile peace she was building was shattered a month later. There was a charity gala being held in the grand ballroom of the Apex Tower, a fundraiser for the very hospital they were building the new wing for. Julian insisted she attend as part of the Ethelredge team. Dressed in an elegant midnight blue gown that Julian's personal assistant had arranged for her, Ilara felt like she was in a fairy tale. Then she saw them. Across the glittering ballroom, holding court by the champagne fountain, were Mark and Isabella. Mark looked handsome and smug in his tuxedo, Isabella a vision in blood-red silk. They were laughing, surrounded by the city's elite. Ilara's blood ran cold. Of course they would be here. Alistair Croft, Isabella's father, was a major donor. She tried to turn away to blend into the crowd, but it was too late. Mark's eyes scanned the room and locked onto hers. A look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed his face, followed by a dark, possessive scowl. He excused himself from his group and began to stride toward her, with Isabella trailing in his wake. "Ilara," he said, his voice dripping with condescending disbelief. "What in the world are you doing here? Did you sneak in with the catering staff?" Isabella eyed Ilara's gown with a dismissive sneer. "It's a rental, I assume. Don't get any champagne on it, dear. You probably can't afford the cleaning fee." The old familiar shame threatened to swallow her whole. The room started to spin. She could feel the eyes of people nearby turning towards them, sensing a scene. "Leave me alone, Mark," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave you alone," he scoffed, taking a step closer. He lowered his voice to a menacing growl. "You don't belong here. This is my world. You had your chance to be in it and you blew it. Now you're scrubbing floors. Go back to your mop and bucket where you belong before you embarrass yourself further." He reached out his hand, closing around her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Come on. I'll have security escort you out the service entrance. Take your hand off her." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the ballroom's chatter like a shard of ice. Julian Thorne had appeared beside them, seemingly out of nowhere. His presence was electric. The air around them crackled with tension. People stopped talking and stared openly. Mark's hand dropped from Ilara's arm as if it had been burned. He stared at Julian, his face a comical mixture of fear and confusion. "Mr. Thorne, I was just dealing with a personal matter. This woman used to be my—" "She is my consultant," Julian stated, his voice flat and cold. "And she is my guest. You, on the other hand, are harassing her. And in my building, no less." Julian's gaze shifted to Mark's, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "So I suggest you and your companion," he said, giving Isabella a look of utter disdain, "return to your table before I have you escorted out." The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. To be thrown out of an event by Julian Thorne would be social and professional suicide. Mark paled, his arrogance evaporating in an instant. He stammered a pathetic apology and practically dragged a fuming Isabella away. The crowd began to murmur, their gazes shifting from the retreating couple to Ilara, now standing beside the most powerful man in the room. Julian turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked. Ilara could only nod, her throat tight with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and a powerful surge of gratitude. He had not just defended her, he had claimed her. He had stood in the shadow of her ex-husband's cruelty and pulled her into the light. "He won't bother you again." Julian said, his voice a firm promise. He then gently offered her his arm. "Now, if you'll permit me, I believe there are some people I'd like my consultant to meet." As Ilara placed her trembling hand on his arm and allowed him to lead her through the parted crowd, she knew Mark was watching. She could feel his hateful glare on her back. But for the first time, it didn't make her feel small. It made her feel strong. The shadow of her past was still there, but it no longer had the power to consume her. The gala incident was a turning point. Julian's public defense of Ilara solidified her new identity. She was no longer Ilara Vance, the disgraced ex-wife, or Ilara, the invisible housekeeper. She was Ilara Vance, Julian Thorne's project consultant, a woman who had the billionaire's personal protection. The whispers in the office changed from gossip to respect. Her relationship with Julian deepened, though it remained strictly professional on the surface. They spent long hours together, not just on the hospital wing, but on other Ethelred projects. He discovered her keen eye for detail and her surprisingly sharp business instincts, honed by years of quietly observing Mark's own dealings. He began to trust her implicitly, giving her more responsibility, pulling her deeper into the intricate web of his empire. Ilara found herself in a gilded cage, but a cage of her own choosing. Her life was a whirlwind of boardrooms, architectural firms, and site visits. She had a new, beautiful apartment paid for by the company in a building overlooking the park. She had a wardrobe of designer clothes and a driver on call. She had everything she had once thought she wanted with Mark, but this time she had earned it. It was hers. Yet a sense of unease lingered. The confrontation with Mark had stirred something ugly. She couldn't shake the feeling that his appearance at the gala wasn't a coincidence, and the venom in his eyes seemed to be about more than just a bruised ego. Her new role gave her access to the highest levels of Ethelred Holdings's files. One evening, working late on a zoning proposal, she stumbled upon a file related to a hostile takeover attempt that Ethelred had thwarted 2 years prior. The rival company was Croft Construction, owned by Alistair Croft, Isabella's father. A chill snaked down her spine. It was a vicious corporate battle. Croft had tried to acquire a smaller tech firm that Ethelred was also bidding on, using underhanded tactics and spreading false rumors to drive down Ethelred's stock price. Julian had ultimately won, but the file detailed the animosity between the two titans. They were not just competitors, they were enemies. Why would Mark, a man obsessed with power and status, align himself with the family of his new wife when that family was a sworn enemy of a man like Julian Thorne? It didn't make sense. Unless Mark wasn't the one in control. Ilara started digging deeper, using her access to cross-reference timelines and financial records. A disturbing pattern began to emerge. Mark's marketing firm, which had been moderately successful when she was with him, had seen an explosive, almost unnatural growth in the past year. The source of this new business, a network of shell corporations and LLCs that, with a little more digging, she traced back to a holding company owned by Alistair Croft. Mark hadn't just married Isabella, he had sold his soul to her father. His success wasn't his own. He was a pawn, a well-compensated tool for Croft Construction. The puzzle pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that made her sick to her stomach. Mark's cruelty during their divorce, his insistence on leaving her with absolutely nothing, on isolating her from their social circle. Had it all been by design? Had Croft wanted her completely out of the picture before bringing Mark into his fold? The final horrifying piece of the puzzle fell into place when she searched for any connection between Mark's firm and Ethelred Holdings before the divorce. And there it was. A small one-time consulting contract from 3 years ago. Mark's firm had been hired to do market research for a new Ethelred residential project, the Apex Tower. As part of the due diligence, Mark had been given low-level security access floor plans and vendor lists. Information that would be trivial to most, but to a rival like Alistair Croft, it could be a goldmine. It was proprietary data protected by a non-disclosure agreement that Mark had signed. An agreement Ilara vaguely remembered him laughing about at the time. As if they'd ever notice, he had boasted. Ilara leaned back in her chair, the screen's glow illuminating her horrified face. Mark hadn't just divorced her. He had been setting himself up for this new life with the Crofts. And to do that, he needed something to offer them, a gesture of loyalty. He had offered them Ethelred's secrets. He had committed corporate espionage. Her mind raced. Why was he back now? Why confront her at the gala? Was it just to humiliate her? Or was there more to it? His words echoed in her ears. You don't belong here. This is my world. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. He was telling her to stay away because her presence in Julian Thorne's inner circle made her a threat to his carefully constructed lie. If she ever figured out what he had done, she could destroy him. Suddenly, she wasn't just dealing with a bitter ex-husband. She was caught in a high-stakes war between two billionaires, and she was holding the ammunition that could bring one of them to his knees. The gilded cage she had found herself in suddenly felt very fragile, and the world outside it infinitely more dangerous. The knowledge of Mark's betrayal sat like a stone in Alara's stomach. It recontextualized everything. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture during their divorce wasn't just the act of a man falling out of love. It was the calculated maneuvering of a criminal covering his tracks. The personal had been a smokescreen for the professional. She knew she had to tell Julian. But how? Walking into his office and accusing his chief rival's son-in-law of corporate espionage based on circumstantial evidence she'd accessed herself felt like a dangerous overreach. She needed proof, something undeniable. Her mind went back to their old house, the one she had been forced to leave so quickly. Mark had always been careless with his paperwork. While he had a main office, he often worked from home, leaving documents on his desk in the study. She remembered packing her life into boxes under his watchful, impatient gaze. In her haste, had she packed something of his by mistake? That night, she tore through the few boxes of belongings she still kept in storage. They were filled with painful memories, photo albums, old letters, trinkets from their travels. At the bottom of a box labeled MISC, Papers, she found it. A plain manila folder tucked between old art class sketchbooks. She didn't remember packing it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were the original hard copies from the Ethelred contract 3 years ago. And behind them, printouts of emails between Mark's private account and an anonymous encrypted address. They were dated from just before their separation. The emails were damning. Mark was discussing the sale of proprietary information, Ethelred's security protocols vendor, cost sheets, and resident profiles for the Apex Tower. The anonymous user was asking specific probing questions. In the final email, Mark wrote, "The price is my entry. The asset is a clean slate. I'm ready to finalize the divorce and sever all old ties." He had traded Ethelred's secrets and his marriage for a place at the Croft family table. The next morning, Alara walked into Julian's office and closed the door behind her. She placed the manila folder on his desk without a word. Julian looked from her pale, determined face to the folder. He opened it and began to read. The silence in the room was absolute as he went through the documents, his face an unreadable mask of calm. But Alara could see a muscle twitching in his jaw, the only sign of the fury building beneath the surface. When he finished, he carefully squared the papers and placed them back in the folder. He looked up at her, his storm-gray eyes darker than she had ever seen them. "This is an act of war," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Alistair Croft has been trying to get an edge on me for years. Now I know how he's been doing it. He's been using your ex-husband as his mole." He stood up and walked to the vast window looking down at the city below. "This explains a lot. A failed bid for a new development project 6 months ago. Croft underbid us by a margin that was mathematically impossible unless he knew our exact numbers. He must have gotten them from Sterling." He turned back to face her. "They won't stop with this. An attack like this is a prelude. They're planning something bigger, something designed to cripple us." He paused, his gaze intense. "And you, Alara, are now in the center of it. They know you work for me. They know you have my ear." Mark's little performance at the gala wasn't just about his ego. It was a threat, a warning to you to stay silent. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at Alara, but it was overshadowed by a surprising surge of anger. "They took 10 years of my life, Julian. They tried to break me and leave me with nothing. I am not going to stay silent." A slow, appreciative smile touched Julian's lips. "Good," he said, "because we are not going to be on the defensive. We are going to set a trap." The plan was audacious. Ethelred Holdings was about to announce its most ambitious project yet, Elysium, a revolutionary self-sustaining residential tower that would redefine the city skyline. It was Julian's legacy project, years in the making. The technology and architectural plans were his most closely guarded secrets. "We are going to leak information about Elysium," Julian explained, his eyes glinting with strategic fire. "But we are going to leak false information. We will create a second complete set of blueprints, financial projections, and material specs. Flawless but fake. This data will contain a fatal flaw, a structural miscalculation so subtle it would take months for engineers to find, but so critical it would bankrupt any company that tried to build it." "And you think Mark will steal it for Croft?" Alara asked. "I know he will," Julian said. "Greed is a predictable motivator. We will make sure the bait is left somewhere he believes he can access. He thinks he still has a back door into our old project server. We will let him think that." The trap was set. Julian's cybersecurity team created a digital honeypot, a decoy server baited with the fake Elysium files. Now all they could do was wait. The final move, Julian explained, had to be public. It had to be a complete and utter humiliation. And he knew the perfect venue. The annual Architects Guild Legacy Ball, the most prestigious event of the year, was in 2 weeks. Alistair Croft was the keynote speaker. It was there they would spring their trap. The unveiling would not be of a building, but of a conspiracy. The night of the Architects Guild Legacy Ball was electric with anticipation. The city's most powerful players filled the grand hall of the museum, a sea of tuxedos and couture gowns. Alara stood beside Julian, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She wore a stunning silver gown, a stark contrast to the gray dress she had once worn as a badge of her ruin. Tonight she felt like a warrior. They had received confirmation just an hour ago. The bait had been taken. The decoy server had been breached from an IP address traced back to one of Mark's shell companies. He had stolen the fake plans. The trap was set. Alistair Croft took the stage to thunderous applause. He was a charismatic speaker, all false modesty and predatory smiles. He spoke of integrity, of innovation, of the future of architecture. Then he came to the climax of his speech. "And it is with great pride," he announced, a triumphant gleam in his eye, "that Croft Construction will be breaking ground on a project that will not only change our city's skyline but will change the world. A project we call Olympus." On the massive screen behind him, a 3D rendering began to play. It was Julian's Elysium project, the fake one. The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs. It was a brazen, shocking move. Croft was not just stealing a project. He was claiming it as his own in front of the entire industry. He was trying to publicly humiliate Julian Thorne. Alara felt Julian's hand gently touch the small of her back, a silent signal. Now. "A fascinating design, Mr. Croft." Julian's voice boomed from the back of the hall, amplified by a microphone his head of security had quietly handed him. All heads swiveled towards him. "Truly revolutionary. In fact, I recognize it. It's a project my team and I scrapped 6 months ago." Alistair Croft's smile froze on his face. I don't know what you're talking about, Thorne. This is the work of my innovation team." "Is it?" Julian replied, starting to walk slowly down the center aisle, Alara by his side. "Because my team scrapped it when our engineers discovered a fatal flaw in the load-bearing calculations of the primary support structure. A flaw that, according to our models, would cause catastrophic structural failure within 5 years of construction. It's a death trap, a bankrupting, reputation-destroying death trap." Panic flashed in Croft's eyes. Mark and Isabella, standing near the stage, looked horrified. "This is absurd," Croft blustered. "You have no proof." "On the contrary," Julian said, his voice dangerously calm as he reached the foot of the stage. "We have a great deal of proof. We have server logs showing that these exact flawed plans were downloaded 2 days ago by a shell corporation owned by your son-in-law, Mark Sterling." He turned his piercing gaze on Mark, who looked as if he was about to be physically sick. "We also have copies of emails from Mr. Sterling dating back 3 years in which he sells proprietary Etherage data to an encrypted account, an account we have now traced to your head of acquisitions, Mr. Croft." He let that hang in the air for a moment, the silence in the hall absolute. Then he delivered the final killing blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, Julian said, his voice resonating with power and authority. "You have just witnessed an admission of the largest act of corporate espionage in this industry's history. I trust the members of the press," he gestured to the reporters who were now frantically recording, "will have many questions for Mr. Croft, as will the district attorney's office, with whom my legal team has just shared a comprehensive file." It was checkmate. The world of Alistair Croft and Mark Sterling crumbled in a matter of seconds. Croft was speechless, his face ashen. Mark looked at Alara, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and begging. He saw not the pathetic weeping woman he had mocked, but a queen who had just toppled his entire kingdom. In the ensuing chaos, Julian led Alara away from the pandemonium through a private exit and out into the cool night air. They stood on a quiet terrace overlooking a moonlit garden, the sounds of the imploding gala fading behind them. Alara let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a year. It was over. The weight of the past, the humiliation, the betrayal, it all lifted, dissipating into the night sky. A single tear slid down her cheek. But this tear was different. It wasn't a tear of pain or sorrow. It was a tear of release, of victory, of a grief finally laid to rest. Julian saw it. He didn't mock it. He didn't question it. He simply reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a handkerchief. He pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a diamond ring. It was not a gaudy, ostentatious stone like Isabella's. It was an elegant, flawless, emerald-cut diamond that seemed to hold all the light of the moon within it. Mark Sterling mocked your tears because he never understood their value. Julian said, his voice soft, his storm-gray eyes filled with a deep, unwavering tenderness. He saw them as a weakness. I see them as a sign of the strength it took to survive him. He took the ring from the box. He gently took her hand, and with his thumb he caught the single tear on her cheek. Then he brought her hand to his lips before sliding the diamond ring onto her finger. "Let me be the one to wipe them away from now on, Alara," he whispered. "Not with pity, but with a promise that you will never have to shed a tear of sorrow again. A promise to build a new world with you, one based on truth and respect. As my partner, as my equal, as my wife." Alara looked from the breathtaking diamond on her finger to the incredible man before her. He hadn't saved her. He had given her the tools to save herself. And in doing so, he had shown her what it truly meant to be valued, to be seen, to be loved. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with a joy so profound it left no room for tears. "Yes." And so Alara's story comes to a close, but her life was just beginning. She went from being an ex-wife dismissed and discarded to a woman who brought an empire of deceit to its knees. Her journey wasn't just about finding love with a billionaire. It was about rediscovering her own worth, a worth that was always there, just waiting to be seen. Her tears of sorrow, once a source of mockery, were transformed into jewels of triumph. This story reminds us that our lowest moments can be the foundation for our greatest comebacks, and that the right person won't just see our scars, they will understand the strength it took to get them. What did you think of Alara's incredible transformation? Could you feel the sting of Mark's betrayal and the thrill of her ultimate victory? Let me know in the comments below what your favorite part of the story was. If you enjoyed this journey of revenge and romance, please don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more tales of love loss and ultimate triumph. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.